What's going on, guys? This is Rob with Animus Visual Reviews. Please forgive my squeaky chair. Today I am at home due to coronavirus. I have no cool studio, no awesome lights this time. I've been asked a lot of times about my grading process on my Yosemite video. So I just kind of wanted to go through that. I didn't do anything special, used a couple of LUTs. So I'll go into detail with you guys just to show you how I graded this. Now, of course, knowing what I know, I probably wouldn't have gone about it this way, but a lot of people seem to like it. So I'll just go over it briefly and explain to you guys what I did to grade this video. So number one, I kind of wanted to go through a couple of the clips real quick and just kind of show you how the clip was exposed. For the most part in this camera, and pretty much since I got it, I try to expose to where I would retain as much of the highlights as I can. I feel like the camera has a decent bit of room in the shadows. However, once you clip those highlights, it does look pretty amateurish in my opinion. So you really want to keep from clipping any of the highlights there. I use false color in the camera, and I would use false color on any monitor that I had, and try to keep the highlights from going all the way red in the false color. So a little bit more in the blues and as little red as I can. This is of course referring to the false color scopes. So I'll just go ahead and get right into it. There's a couple of nodes. This is pretty much my node tree for this grade. There's a couple things that aren't color related. However, for the most part, it was the same across the board for all of my shots, minus a few tweaks here and there to exposure. So I'll start from the top. I'll turn that on. As you can see, fairly significant difference. This is a mixture of the Pocket 4K film to extended video V4 LUT that comes standard with Davinci Resolve. So nothing special there. I pretty much wanted to convert my footage from raw space or log space to Rec 709. Knowing what I know now, I'd probably use a different LUT, maybe Matteo Bertoli's buttery LUTs that are not as crunchy, and by that I mean just not as contrasty. In this case, you can see it really pushes the shadows down and it clips the highlights potentially depending where you exposed. You could kind of fight that off with a serial adjustment, so basically a serial before or pre-LUT, and do a adjustment to the highlights to make sure they don't clip at the LUT. So kind of something that I would do now. Again, at that time I didn't know any better, so I just kind of ran it as is. Likewise, there's a primary balance adjustment. It appears for the most part I just did some very subtle tweaks to the gamma here. As you can see, the gain, so I've just made a couple of adjustments. Mainly the gamma and the gain have seen a reduction here. I brought down the highs, and in the gamma I've also brought up the midtones. So that's the only adjustments I made on this first node. Moving on to node 2, that's where I applied my secondary LUT as well as a key. I'll speak about the key first, which I have a 0.04 gain output. So it means I have the LUT essentially at 40% rather than at full. The LUT that I did use here is a LUT from Kreativ Wedding. I'll go back to the LUT because apparently Resolve was to act crazy. So this is a LUT from Kreativ Wedding. This one's called Kreativ LUTs Iceland. Kreativ Wedding, if you do not know, is a company owned by Riccardo Fasoli, who is a genius at this. When I started doing wedding videos, he was a huge inspiration. His work is amazing. You should check it out. He has very moody work and very awesome color grading. I've bought like all his LUTs and kind of broke them down and studied them to see how he kind of does things. And for the most part, I've noticed that it's very moody. It's quite dark, and I love the look. So I use these LUTs here, even though they're primarily wedding LUTs. It doesn't really make any difference here as long as you get the look that you're looking for. So I use the Kreativ LUT Iceland flat in this case at a 40% gain basically on the key output. Moving on to the next, I went ahead and pretty much just cooled down the image. It's going to be hard to see, I believe, but as you can maybe see, it went from kind of a neutral standard look, properly balanced, to daylight. And I pushed kind of some cooler tones into it. Overall, I probably wouldn't have done this now, at least not as deep into the blues. But basically what I did here is I pushed blues into the lift and I kind of try to counteract it by warming up the midtones a little bit to keep it from looking too blue. So not a whole lot of change. As you can see, subtlety is the key, guys, with grading. I'm sure you've heard it with other people who are much better at color grading than I am. But basically, you want to keep your changes subtle. Too much might just look, overbearing. So I've just kind of, again, slightly warmed up or slightly pulled up some blues out of the midtones and added a little bit of blue, removed some of the red using the lift and gamma wheels in the resolve panel here. So moving on to the next node, I have a contrast pop. That's a Resolve Open Effects effect that they have built into Resolve. Hard to kind of see in the video probably, but it does add a lot of small detail into these very highly detailed sections like the branches, the leaves, and right around here in the fern. That's off, on, off, on. Off, on. So it adds a lot of little high frequency detail in the smaller parts of the image. So personal preference there, guys. I just wanted to test some of the Resolve features and see if I could really make the image pop. Again, it's pretty subtle. It'd be hard to see it on the video, but I added it kind of subtly in there just as a little bit of kick. I also apparently made an adjustment here because, again, this video has been so long, I don't exactly know what I did to it. I'm just going back because of the request. So I did, in the Lumiverse saturation, desaturate the blacks. Knowing what I know now, I probably would go back and try to counteract the blues and the shadows just at the very low end with a little bit of warmth to try to cancel out any shift to the very deepest shadows of the image to kind of keep those darkest blacks as neutral as possible. Moving on from there, I have sharpen edges. This is also another built-in Open Effects Resolve effect. Probably not going to be able to see it, but basically, if you look at the edges of the tree here at the sharpness, edges of each one of these trees, edges of these branches, when I turn it on, off, on, off, and back on, it just adds a little bit more detail here to, again, the high frequency areas. I'm not so sure that I would add it now. I'm not a huge fan of over sharpened videos. I felt like the lens I was using at the time may have been a little soft, which in some cases it was, so I added it. But again, personal preference there. I personally prefer videos to have a little bit of what people call cineblur. A lot of high-end cinema cameras just have that kind of softness to it, and it's more appealing. Of course, people are now using things like ProMIS and things like that to try to soften their footage. So just something to think about. And again, consider doing or not doing in your footage. I did it at this time, but I probably wouldn't do it now. And for the final node, I have film grain, 35 millimeters. You can feel free to copy these settings. I don't think I did much of a tweak, if anything. But for the most part, film grain, I feel like, again, adds a little bit more of that quality that would remove the digital edge to a lot of this footage. We know this footage is very sharp, and so I wanted to kind of take that edge off. And once you upload it to YouTube, you may not even see much of the grain, especially at something like 35 millimeters, which is pretty fine. Sometimes I like to go a little coarser so you can really see it. I'm a big fan of film grain, a big fan of analog video. So just something I added to it. Not sure if it makes a huge difference, especially, again, once you upload it to YouTube. But it's on there, so I just wanted to go ahead and cover it. I'll move on to a different shot here. For example, this one, which when I turn everything on, I'll show you before, after, before, after. So a lot of saturation, a lot of contrast is added. All of the nodes should be about the same. There could be some personal tweaks to each node just to kind of fit within the shot. As you can see here, I kind of darkened that mid-tone and the highlights on this one. I also have the same reduction in saturation on the darkest parts of the image. So it's there. The sharpen edges is still there. Contrast pop is still here. Film grain is still there. Same LUT. And of course, I just may have done a different adjustment in the gamma and gain of this image. But for the most part, I'm pretty sure I copied and pasted the settings and the nodes across all clips. So I think that's pretty much it for the most part, guys. Again, nothing super complicated. I'm not an expert colorist. I used, some standard LUTs, thanks to Kreativ Wedding for their amazing color work. I personally would change things up a little bit now that I know what I know. I've been doing a lot more color studying. Of course, I've had a lot more time with the camera. But I just wanted to go ahead and go over what process I use to color this video, as I've been asked numerous times, and I have asked many people to subscribe in order to get this video, so I just wanted to get it out to you guys to fulfill my end of the bargain. That said, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, please leave them down below. Again, disclaimer, I'm not a master or expert colorist, and I know a little bit more about how I like my images. But again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them down below. If you like this video, leave a like, subscribe, consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one.